to address some of our most serious social problems. So it's really an exciting time. And we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the initiatives coming out of Washington that can help support the programs that you're working on. It's such a refreshing change, even better than going from winter to spring. So thank you all for joining us today. And going back to your high school days, you remember you were taught that states are the laboratories for trying out new approaches. And that's so true in the trauma-informed area. We're learning so many different states are trying different ways to structure trauma-informed programs. Back in February, we had presentations on the Delaware trauma-informed program, which was really a hybrid of government and nonprofit. And today we're going to have presentations on the approach adopted by 2 states that have decided to put their trauma-informed programs in their government with a lot of support from their governor and providing the governmental vehicle for development of a statewide trauma-informed strategy. So we're going to have presentations by New Jersey and Pennsylvania, by Dan Jurman from Pennsylvania and Dave Ellis, and possibly Commissioner Beyer. Is she going to join us?
Commissioner Beyer's on.
Oh, hi, Commissioner Beyer. Okay. Oh, there you are. No, I don't have you. So, and Commissioner of Children and Department of Children and Family. So we're really pleased and honored to have the 2 representatives of 2 states that are, I think, leading the way in creating state governmental trauma-informed entities. And we look forward to your presentations. I'd like to turn it over to Jesse for a couple of announcements. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington. And then we're going to turn the microphone over to our distinguished presenters.
Thanks, Dan. I will keep this as short as possible because we really want to let as much time for our wonderful presenters as possible. So there's 2 sign-on letters that we wanted to inform all of you about, and I will put them in the chat. So that way, if while I'm speaking, you want to just hop on, or if after the call you want to hop on and just sign your name electronically, that would be great. CTIPP is doing a sign-on letter for Congress to hold an oversight hearing on the World Health Organization study that found that adverse childhood experiences cost the United States $748 billion annually. Dan and I met with the author of that study, Dr. Mark Bellis, the other week, maybe it was last week, and he would be a great presenter to sort of let Congress know about all that was found in that study. And we could then go into strategies to help work to prevent and mitigate ACEs and trauma across the lifespan and talk about the costs beyond just economics. And so we're trying to gather signatures for that meeting or for that oversight hearing to sort of send to Congress. And so the link that I just put into the chat, if you want to sign on to that, it's a quick and easy process to be able to do so. The second sign-on letter that I wanted to let you all know about is from the Center for Educational Improvement. And I am putting that in the chat now. And that is a link to a Google Doc that has in it a document that sort of outlines what the priorities that they're asking for. But essentially, it's a request to the Biden administration to support the following concepts in our education system in the United States moving forward. So it's understanding neuroscience, heart-minded connections, or the heart-mind connection, and the adverse effects of trauma, advancing the use of technology, helping students find meaning while maintaining high academic standards, revamping how learning is assessed and how assessment data guide instructional decisions, encouraging equity through anti-racist curricula, increasing equitable access to resources, and advancing self-care, mindfulness, and social emotional learning. So if you want to sign on to that as well, there's a lot of really great requests that they're making in that. And so those two documents are focused on those two asks that I just outlined. CTIPP and the National Trauma Campaign are also going on a webinar spree, much like we did around CARES Act, for the American Rescue Plan Act. And so we have a few upcoming webinars, which if you're a part of the National Trauma Campaign, you may have already received a link to sign up for our webinar on May 6th. I will put that in the chat again when I'm done this short presentation here, but there's a lot of money that we can mobilize around to sort of advocate for trauma-informed practices to advance through the stimulus funds. And so we really want to mobilize around that. Last month, I know we went over it, so I won't go into the specifics here, but if you would like to join a webinar, please do. If you have a local coalition or statewide coalition or a national organization, and you would like for us to present to your network on the opportunities that exist in the American Rescue Plan Act, please feel free to reach out. We would be happy to do that for and with you. And so as we continue to advance trauma-informed and resilience-focused and healing-centered approaches, practices, and environments across the country, it's not just through the American Rescue Plan Act. That is an immediate opportunity that exists, but there are a lot of other policies that are being implemented at the national, state, local, and tribal levels. And to support this advocacy, if you haven't already done so, please join the National Trauma Campaign. I will put a link in to join the campaign to become part of the network to communicate with your congressional representatives and senators, the opportunities that are out there. And if you all already have signed up for the National Trauma Campaign, or if you're about to, please help us spread the word to others to help join the campaign and really illustrate the groundswell of support that exists for these programs, policies, and practices. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dan and put a few of those other links that I talked about there.
Hey, can I say one quick thing, Jesse?
Sure.
Carrie, that we are also going to be doing with PACES Connection a webinar with Dan and Jesse and Marlo, and hopefully we'll have met someone in our community who has been successful in writing a grant to get some funding. And if anybody has a lead on getting funding, send me a note in the chat on May the 14th, and it will be at I think it's at 3 o'clock Eastern on the 14th, and I'll write, yeah, it's 3 o'clock Eastern time on the 14th for Dan and Jesse and Marlo to talk about funding, and hopefully we'll have some with us, one of our statewide leaders or one of our community managers or someone in the PACES Connection community. We sent out a survey, and we know of 3 or 4 communities that are working to get funding out of CARES or American Rescue so far. So anyway, but we'll have updates on that on the 14th. So mark your calendar for that, please, too. Thanks so much, Jesse.
Well, thank you, Carrie. That people don't know that Carrie Sipp, who was the dynamo out of the southern region for PACES Connection. So as I mentioned, when I first came to Washington years ago, the joke used to be $1 million here and $1 million there, and soon you're talking about real money. Now it's $100 billion here and $100 billion there, and you're talking about real money. The American Rescue Plan Act has hundreds of billions of dollars for a number of programs that can be used to implement trauma-informed programs. One of the most exciting ones is this $122 billion for local education agencies funneled down through the states, but almost all the money has to go down to the LEAs, and it can be used for any purpose that is consistent with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it can definitely be used for mental health programs to address mental health problems caused by the pandemic. And we know from lots of history that traumatic experiences like the pandemic, like floods, like hurricanes, produce trauma among the younger generation that they bring to school with them. And schools should and could use their Rescue Act money to implement trauma-informed programs. I'm sorry, that's my. Let me shut them up. I'm sorry. In addition, states, I lost my number, but states are getting a couple of $100 billion that flows down to local communities. And again, local communities can use that to fund trauma-informed coalitions, the hundreds of them that are developing in local communities around the country. I know they're all thirsty for funding, and the Rescue Act money can be used for that purpose if you can persuade your state government to, and your local governments to use the money for that purpose. Project Aware got an additional $10 million, and we know that there are schools and other institutions around the country that have used Project Aware money to implement trauma-informed programs. The Community Mental Health Block Grant got an additional $1.5 billion. The Substance Abuse Block Grant got another $1.5 billion. Head Start got $1 billion. And if you're a tribe, there are a whole bunch of funding pots in there for tribes to implement trauma-informed programs, as well as Native Hawaiians and Alaska Natives. So it's really a treasure trove of funding that can be used to implement trauma-informed programs. So we encourage you to get active, and we know there are going to be lots of, Jesse uses the term sharks in the water, a lot of advocacy groups seeking to tap that money for their purposes. But we also know that the pandemic is producing trauma, particularly in our schools, but throughout the community. And some of that money should be used to address that trauma, because otherwise the trauma is going to last and cause problems long after the virus is gone. Secondly, President Biden has introduced his infrastructure plan, and it has two pieces of it that are directly related to trauma. One is elder care, and we're going to be partnering with the National Jewish Federation's agency on trauma and the elderly, trauma and aging, but trauma among elders is an often overlooked area. And we encourage you to work with your state and local governments to make sure that some of the money that is being made available for elder care is spent to provide training for elder care providers to learn about trauma. And finally, the president has submitted his new budget, his FY22 budget to the Congress, and it includes something like a 35% increase for Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and a huge amount of money, additional money for CDC. And we want to encourage Congress to make sure that some of those funds are used by schools to implement trauma-informed programs, and are used by CDC to expand the really great work they've been doing on trauma-informed programs. So we encourage you to start talking to your school districts, particularly those that are eligible for Title I funding, that they are going to get a major increase in funding, and that some of that funding should be used to implement trauma-informed programs. So the money is pouring out of Washington, and as usually it goes to the squeaky wheel. So we encourage you all to be the squeaky wheel and fight for that money to go to trauma-informed programs. With that, we're going to go from Washington to the states, and we'll begin alphabetical order with New Jersey. So I'd like to turn it over to Dave Ellis and Christine Beyer to present on the exciting statewide initiative going on in the state of New Jersey. Dave, Christine, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's nice meeting everyone, and we really just appreciate the opportunity to be able to participate today and talk with you about what we've been up to in New Jersey. So Dave and I discussed this earlier. I'm going to kick us off, and then I'm going to turn it over to him. And certainly we'd be happy to answer any questions if people want to put them in the chat or just raise your hand. So I am currently the Commissioner of New Jersey's Department of Children and Families. I've been in this role since 2018, so just over 3 years now. And although I'm not new to New Jersey, I've born and raised in New Jersey my whole life, and worked for a private nonprofit, and then went to work for the state in 2003 when the state was sued and we entered our federal lawsuit. And I worked in our protective service division, and then ultimately when the Department of Children and Families was created for about 11 years. And then I left and went to go work for Casey Family Programs. And I share that because it was during my 6 years at Casey Family Programs that I was introduced to ACEs and trauma-informed care, and had the good fortune of being assigned to work with the state of Wisconsin, with then First Lady Tawnette Walker, and got to really help lead her signature initiative, which was around, creating Wisconsin as a trauma-informed state. And so it was there that I feel like, I was struck when I had not heard about ACEs before, and I hadn't heard about this study before. And, during that time, just had an opportunity to connect with so many national leaders in this area and in the field. And it really felt like at that point, at least within Wisconsin, that it felt like at the forefront of this movement and starting something big. And so I did that work for 6 years, and then in 2018 came to New Jersey, and had, the opportunity to think about what we were going to do around ACEs and trauma-informed care and healing-centered communities in New Jersey. And when I started asking around, I realized that there wasn't a comprehensive initiative around ACEs, or, there wasn't enough movement or action. People really weren't even talking about it. And I think maybe because I had just lived in that space, like lived and breathed it for 6 years, that it was quite shocking, actually. And yet, as I started having the opportunity to go around the state and talk to more providers and hear from our private nonprofits and community members, and, did a listening tour to listen directly to parents across the state, I realized that there were pockets of work happening, and there were providers that knew about ACEs and were trying to create trauma-informed communities or practices. But again, it wasn't centralized. They weren't necessarily connected with one another. Someone could have been doing work in the northern part of the state and had no idea that a very similar program was happening in the southern part of the state. And so as we started developing our strategic plan within the department, the idea of mitigating ACEs, of working to ameliorate, adverse childhood experiences, it's at the heart of our department and the work that we're doing. And so I had the good fortune of being introduced to Atia Weiss from the Burke Foundation, who's also on the call with us today. Hi, Atia. And it was, during some initial conversations with Atia, and then the Nicholson Foundation and also the Terrell Fund, I think came and met in the conference room when we were meeting in person then, to talk about, the work they were doing and the ACEs study that they were launching, and really wanting to just share kind of what they were seeing in the conversations that they were having, not only, with social services, but the healthcare community and education and schools, and thinking about how we could bring all of this together. And I'm not sure if it was Arturo at the Nicholson Foundation or Atia, I think, who had read The Deepest Well. And it was at that point that I think they kind of got the bug also around, like, what can we do in this space? And so having that collaborative, or what those three foundations became known as, the ACE Funders Collaborative, now the ACEs Collaborative, and DCF joined that. And so I think we met maybe on a monthly basis, just to really begin talking about where were the synergies and where were the opportunities for partnership. And, what did we need to happen to get a sense of the prevalence of ACEs in New Jersey, and trying to determine what practices were happening and how we could bring all of this together. And one of the things we talked about was having a central, I want to say like repository for information, but thinking about having someone actually lead this work, or from like thinking about what could we do as a state entity, and not only DCF, but then how did we bring our other department commissioners to the table? How would we go about making this an all of government kind of approach, knowing that ACEs impact all of us, right? It's universal. It impacts all of us. And so as commissioners and with the other state departments, it impacts our clients, it impacts our workforce and our population. And so wanting to really begin to educate our the other departments and our other government partners, both state and county, but then also bringing them together with providers and community, and that this wasn't going to be a top-down led initiative, but we really needed our top level leaders to even understand what ACEs were. And, I think back, wasn't that long ago, but it was shocking to me how many state leaders really didn't know about ACEs, had not heard about the study, didn't really understand how ACEs or how trauma was impacting their workforce or impacting their clientele. And so fast forward to the ACEs report that the three funders commissioned, and then out of that, grew this idea of our statewide plan, and going to community, using family voice, constituent voice, listening to parents about what trauma-informed care, healing-centered communities, the impact of ACEs, what did that mean to them? What did those words mean? How did that resonate? What could we develop within New Jersey to be able to address that and really come together? And so the funders also, as we talked about, hiring someone to be able to lead this work. And while the Department of Children and Families, we were more than happy to kind of host a position or hire someone, we didn't want it to just be focused on one department. Like, we wanted this position to kind of be up and outside of the department and have some authority to be able to convene all of the departments. And the Department of Children and Families ended up being the entity to house our executive on loan. And again, thanks to the funders, but meeting Dave and, going through a pretty extensive interview process and doing a national search. As soon as I met Dave, it was like, he's the person that's going to get to the community level. Like, when he talks about community was the same as when I or my other leaders in the department and the funders were talking about community, and that was going to be the linchpin, I think, for change and transformation. And so the ACEs work and the statewide action plan that we ended up finalizing and then was just launched last February. And that was, a really nice event, because we had the governor and the first lady and the lieutenant governor and Dave and I there to talk about the importance of this work, and that it really is an all of government approach, and that we all have a part to play. It's not an initiative, it's not one thing. There are a number of opportunities for individuals to participate at every level, whether you're a professional or you are a citizen in New Jersey. And so I'll let Dave talk a little bit more about the plan and some of the activities that have been born out of that and things that we're continuing to develop and cultivate. But the other piece that I just want to share with you is that the ACEs work and the statewide plan is one piece of multiple initiatives and multiple transformative kinds of activities and actions that are happening in the state and within our department, so that, you know, when we talk about the changes that we want to see, and we want to do away with adverse childhood experiences, or we want to help people heal from them, we're also utilizing an equity lens. We're doing a lot of work in the department around race equity, educating our workforce. At least in DCF, we have 6,600 staff. All of them are going through race equity training that just began in March. We have a race equity steering committee that we developed about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now, that's been leading some of that work within the department. And that, in addition to, we have an Office of Staff Health and Wellness that I created about a year and a half ago, again, specifically to address the needs of our workforce, knowing that many of staff that work in any kind of child welfare or protective service work have secondary trauma, that many of our staff in the department are minority staff. And so they bring their own trauma through racism from the communities that, you know, their communities may have been impacted, and then coming to work and then having the trauma of the work that we do. And so wanting to make sure that if we're really serious about making change and transforming our system in the way that our staff interact and relate with their clients, that we actually are taking care of them as well and working to heal them. And so we're creating like healing communities within our own department in order then that we're able to bring that to our clients. So I won't go in. There's a lot of other things in the department that we're working on that really all roll up to this transformative vision that we have. And I think much of it will be realized through the action that will come out of our statewide action plan. So thank you all. Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Beyer, and thank you, Jesse and Dan, for the invitation to be here this afternoon. I've been asked twice today how I'm doing. And I will tell you that that is one of the questions that I typically ask people, and you know, you get the answer, well, I'm doing okay, everything is fine. Well, today everything isn't fine for me. I moved to the state of New Jersey after accepting the position as the executive on loan, now referred to as the executive director of the Office of Resilience. I moved here from the city of Minneapolis. And if you've been following any of the news, you know that there was a verdict yesterday, and you also know that there was another killing shortly before that verdict was issued in one of our suburbs. And so know that a lot of those people you saw on the screen are friends of mine. The African-American community is quite small there. And I've been in the streets with a number of them. So it holds a really personal piece for me. And so when you think of trauma, when we talk about trauma, we talk about individual trauma, we talk about trauma in the family, but think of it in that larger capacity of what happens to a community when it gets impacted this way. And how do you begin to respond to that? And as I woke up this morning, listening to Minnesota Public Radio, even though I live in Somerset, New Jersey, Minneapolis is still the place I call home. I was listening to a story about a 15-year-old girl who called law enforcement because some people, it was a domestic. Some older women had broken into her house. She grabbed a knife, started to defend herself. When the police came, they thought she was the aggressor that killed her. There is a piece of this that starts to grind on you after a while. I mean, when I first touched this world was listening to Vincent Folletti out in San Diego, was almost 12, 15 years ago. And it was the first day I realized that I wasn't crazy, right? And so I fast forward to accepting this position in New Jersey and coming here. I've been working in New Jersey for a number of years before that with the New Jersey Education Association. They heard me present at one of their statewide conferences, and they decided they wanted, here's the kicker, it's a state teachers union, right? 200,000 strong, wanted to become trauma informed. And I'm going, hell yeah, let's do this, right? I mean, where do you find a union that wants to do something like this? And so we started down that road. Little did I know it's going to lead me into this role and working with people like Commissioner Beyer and Arturo Brito and Atia Weiss and Kurt Fields and a whole bunch of other folks in this work. When I came here, I came to do this work. And I had two conditions. One, that I had to be invited in. You don't go into someone else's backyard and start to dig it up without having their permission. And two, I had to be invited in by the community. They had to lead whatever it was that we were going to develop. Because as I've been out doing this work, and not just the formal work that I do now, but I consider all of my almost 70 years of life as being the work, that I've learned that we train everybody and give information to everybody but the community. And by community, my definition is those most directly impacted. And so one of the things I was absolutely adamant about, and Claire Reedy from the Health Federation of Philadelphia, I see you're on here. She knows because she was one of the first groups that I reached out to introduce folks in New Jersey to them and said, if you want to do this work, look at them. Look at the work that they're doing in Philly. And let's talk more about how we do something like that here. So I'm going to share my screen with you and take you on a little tour of the New Jersey ACEs Action Plan and how this is all kind of rolled out. And at the same time, when I finish, I'm going to ask my executive assistant if she would please see if I can actually make this happen. Come on, slideshow, thank you. For those of you who don't know, as I keep telling people, I am a storyteller, not a story writer. The person I will turn this over to when I am finished is a story writer and a storyteller, and she's very good at it. And so I'm inviting her into my presentation today with you. So the New Jersey ACEs Action Plan. When I first came here, the first thing they said to me in July of last year was, we need to get this out by December. And I said, yep, and we'll get it out the door when it's ready. And if we can't figure out how to do that, if we kick it out the door too soon, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense. And so let's make sure we do the plan right. And so what you're about to see is a growth for the state of New Jersey. And so when I got to New Jersey, as Commissioner Beyer said, there were a lot of things that were going on, but they were just kind of spread out. Nobody really talked to each other. Everything was in a silo. And this was all of that stuff that was happening pre-planned. And one of the things I wanted to let people know was there's a lot of good stuff going on here. And if we could just figure out how to talk to one another and not go into the this is mine mentality that I see. And as I was listening to Jesse and Dan talk about the amount of money that's coming out of DC, it's a lot of money. And if we go about it the wrong way, we'll end up in more of a competition to get it. And we may not end up with it where it actually needs to go, right? And because I've seen that happen, especially in my community, where massive amounts of money are put out in the African-American community, and the answers don't show up. And that scares me when I see this type of money being thrown at things. So let us fast forward Commissioner talked about February when the plan was released. Well, in that statewide action plan, we have five core areas, right? And so the first thing that you find out is that we wanted to talk about becoming trauma-informed and healing-centered as a state designation. And this carries a lot of significance. And for me, the significance is around the healing-centered. Everyone talks about trauma-informed, but very few people talk about healing-centered. And the healing-centered piece of this talks about strengths. It talks about what are the assets that people have that we can build on, and not so much always focused on the trauma on the back end, even though, as I keep telling people, trauma is an interesting thing. First of all, it's not our destiny, and it's part and parcel of who we are. No matter what happens, I will always have the trauma that's happened to me. That event will not be erased. Even if I'm resilient, it still resides. And so how do we go about doing this work? And so we've been in the process of trying to figure out, what does that designation look like? And how do you help anybody else get there, right? So creating New Jersey specific tools like assessments to figure out, what do we need to be doing? Working with different state agencies. We just had an interagency team meeting with 9 state agencies, representatives from the governor's office and the first lady's office. And we spent 40 minutes of that conversation listening to a chief from one of the Native American tribes of the Turtle Clan and one of the tribes here in New Jersey, hearing the history that most of us didn't know or didn't want to know, right? And so how do we deal with all of that? The second core strategy is around awareness. You know, there's a lot of people who know about ACEs, but I'm finding out that there's a whole lot more that don't. And as I go around and I talk with people and I said, oh yeah, I've been trained on ACEs. And I found out that that means something different. For every time I talk to somebody, I get a different answer as to what that is. And so part of what we're looking at here is, how do we come up with a common language? So that when we say ACEs, everybody's talking about the same thing. When we talk about I've been trained in ACEs, everybody understands what that means. And everybody then begins to become aware that this is something, number one, this stuff happens. And given where we are right now, I would tell you that there is not a person in this country that doesn't have at least one ACE, right? One traumatic event, because COVID has impacted us all. And if we really stop and think about it, we live in a land of multiple pandemics. COVID is just the one that we talk about the most. I consider ACEs to be a pandemic. I also look at the issues around racial justice in this country and the racism that resides here. That is another pandemic. And so we have multiple areas that we can be talking about around awareness. What you will see soon in the state of New Jersey is the culmination, the creation of a statewide awareness campaign targeted at law enforcement and education. Those are the first 2 groups. Eventually, we will move to more groups. We'll look at community and doing a community awareness campaign specifically, so that we can get this message out in multiple ways to multiple people. The third one is about community-driven policy and funding priorities. You know, one of the things that always happened to me when I was in Minneapolis, that my name showed up in all kinds of proposals. Now, I didn't say they could put my name in there, but later on they would come and say, Dave, we put your name in, we wrote you into this proposal. I said, how do you know that I want to do that? And second, and most important, did you ask the community if this was something that they wanted? And so what you see in this plan, this statewide plan, you'll notice that the community's voice is there in their words, not ours. They're the ones who came up with the 5 core strategy areas. They're the ones who told us how to do the work to get to this point. And so we wanted to honor that in all of this. And from a funding priorities perspective, we're looking at new ways of figuring out how do we fund the projects, something beyond the traditional funding scopes. And so we're working with, of all people, Laura Porter is helping us figure out funding strategies. And that's just one piece of it. And I'm going to go ahead and open that little can of worms, Commissioner. I asked you if I could, so I'm just going to throw it out there. In that meeting we just had, Commissioner Beyer kind of issued a challenge to folks. Department of Children and Families has put $4 million into a fund to do community microgrants. And we're looking at a request for ideas, not a request for proposals. We want to be able to get down to the individual level in the community. What are the ideas that the community has, that the really small nonprofits or the individuals who never get money, what are the things that they dream? And how do we figure out how to work with them to make it come true? And so in July, hopefully we'll have the entire process ironed out. It's not a simple one because you still have to follow state purchasing guidelines. It's the reason why I said I wanted to do a request for ideas. And as I told people, I don't care how you send them to me. It can be a napkin. It can be a TikTok video. I don't care how you send it, but I want your ideas. I want to create such a buzz in community that they will take this entire process and own it. Not as if they don't believe that they do already, because trust me, I'm getting lots of input from people about things that were not in the plan, as well as new things they would like to see in it. You know, it's interesting, you would think that as we go through this, we would recognize that we did not specifically call out individuals with disabilities. It took us a little while to grapple with that, especially since one of my favorite sayings is, if you design for disability, everybody wins, right? How could I have possibly missed that? But that's why I have community partners. They help us stay focused. Core strategy 4, we do a lot of training, and not just professionals. We train churches, we train community anybody and everybody that'll sit still long enough. We will provide training. We currently have, and this is somewhat tied to the 5th core piece around promoting trauma-informed healing care services and supports. We're developing a technical assistance center. That will not be the name in the end. We're going back to the community because it's not necessarily a technical assistance center. It's something beyond that. And maybe it becomes an innovation lab. We're not sure. But that will be the community who helps drive that for us. But we have soon to be 80 people that are trained specifically in the ACE interface curricula. And we chose one because we wanted people to have the same language. There are lots of folks who are doing trainings across New Jersey, but there's not one centralized thing that's happening. And so, excuse me, we looked at this as a base, and that there are a lot of other things that can be laid on top of that around relationships, around mental health, around other areas. And so how do we do that? But we have people that can present at just about every level and have the ability to go out and do this work. So those are the 5 strategies. And so fast forward, we released the plan. Yes, there we go. I was hoping that it would move. This is what that map looks like now. And so you see everything. This is where we started doing trainings. And so the T's that you see are trainings, the P are presenters. You've got license holders. We have 3 organizations that own licenses to get people trained. Across the state, we have a partnership with Rob Anda and Laura Porter, who are ACE Interface, to help us make sure that we keep the fidelity in the process itself. But what you see is the branching, the arborization. What really happened on February 4th, when we released that plan, there was an explosion of activity and people started to connect with one another, which is really what we've been trying to do. We want to be a bridge. We want this plan to be a bridge. Nowhere in it does it tell you specifically as an organization how to do your work. What it says is, let's partner together and figure out what is it that we can help you with, and what's the deeper work we can do that brings community into focus within this plan. And that's one of the things that folks look at us and go, but tell me what to do. If I do that, I've defeated the whole purpose. That's what we typically do, is walk in and say, do this. But you know what? I don't know all of those communities well enough to do that. And I would probably say that those of us who work at the state level or even a county level don't know everything that's going on. And so, no, I don't give out specific answers. We'll work on those together and we'll create them and we'll help implement it. And it's not about did we fail or succeed. The real question is, what are we learning along the way? This is where we think we're going to end up going. You'll notice that we've pruned away a lot of the stuff, but the bonds are getting stronger. This might look familiar to some of you, right? Those 3 slides, if you look at them all together and you think about this, if you've seen a presentation with the ACE interface curriculum, you've seen this, which talks about the neural connections, the synaptic density at birth, at elementary, and a pruning process. It's the same process. The plan, we didn't even think about it. One of the people I have working to help us develop that technical assistance center, this is how she said, this is the work you're doing. This is what it looks like if you map it. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think that way. And so I really do appreciate having people around me that do. So that is pretty much where we're at. We have so many projects that are starting to crop up here in New Jersey that people are asking us to be a part of, and we're willingly doing that. From working with the state agencies to figure out what does it truly mean to be trauma informed as a state agency, and how do you go through that process, and what do we need to put into place? What's the assessments? All the way down to the mom and pop organizations that says, we're already trauma informed. Okay, then how do we help you help someone else get there? What can we do to help strengthen the work that we're doing across the state of New Jersey? Commissioner Beyer talked about all the different things. A lot of our foundations are focused on 0 to 3, 0 to 5. So there are initiatives constantly moving into this space. There's a new conversation about opening a one-stop shop 0 to 5 early childhood program, where it not only houses that program, but it also holds the doula program, that one of the doula programs that we have in the state. My conversation with them is, can I locate the Office of Resilience in that same building with the school? So that as we're doing this work, we can inform it and it can inform us, because we'll be working directly with the community and doing this work. Now, I know I haven't covered everything. And I'm just going to go to this little slide right here, because I'm pretty sure folks have questions. And Dan and Commissioner, if you have more to add to this, please do. But Dan and Jesse, I'm not sure how you want to handle Q&A, but I'm going to turn this back to you. And I do have one other thing that I'll offer when we get close to the end of this part.
Yeah, Dave, thank you so much. Due to timing, I was wondering if it would be okay if we finish up with your part of the presentation. I know that you wanted for Angela to do a reading.
I do.
If I'm not mistaken, so I want to give you the space for that, and then let Dan present about HEAL PA, and then come back for sort of a group Q&A. And for folks who are putting Q&A in the chat, please continue to. I'm taking a note of that, so that way we can ask the questions that folks have.
Absolutely. I've asked my executive assistant, Angela Madrano Sanchez, she told me, she says, I had problems sleeping. And so I had to get this out of my head. And every time she says something to me like that, I know that something special is coming. And when she told me this, I said, yep, there is all of the work in one place that all of us are doing across the country. So I'm going to ask her to repeat that for you today. Angela?
Thank you, Dave. Good afternoon, everybody. So I've written a piece inspired by the persuasive communication creative style of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and most recently Amanda Gordon at the inauguration and it's simply titled New Jersey. If we want a new Jersey, we have to pioneer. We looked into the mirror, but the rear mirror reflects what's behind. Forward requires us to change our view. Look ahead. Look at eyes trying to connect, to detect a pulse of humanity. Behind the white empty papers that quickly lock us neatly in a box, Mama used to say, too much screen time will ruin your vision. Too much screen time strengthens division. To see clearly, we need to look outside the lines that aim to describe the indescribable wonder of human life. Get away from the box just a moment. Four corners of a paper that corner us in boxes. I am not my trauma. I am whole. And as New Jersey aims with new arrows, we look at the whole target to find the center. Our quiver filled with more than just one arrow. We seek balance. That is the challenge. Relationships keep us from alien nations, trapped inside the construct of titles. Doctor, I'm asking you to join me in my vulnerability. As you examine what you see, examine thee. Take a seat. As the patient or the client, I can teach. You are a skilled professional, but I am the expert on the subject matter, me. White lab coats and gloves to keep things sterile. Sterile states can't bring forth life. New Jersey, a state where communities can thrive. We seek balance, homeostasis, the state in which individuals thrive. They arrive at a practice, an office, wait on a line, we respond. And although it appears safer, that's how we develop new men and women who are seen past the screen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. Dave, Commissioner Beyer, thank you. I would invite everybody to come off of mute for 5 seconds to give an incredible round of applause or snaps or whatever you are feeling for that wonderful presentation.
Wonderful.
Speech by Angela.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
We missed a little
Beautiful.
bit of it.
Always so glad to have that. Fortunately, that's recorded, so we can cut that, share it broadly. Thank you so much. Keep pouring in questions if you have them, but I would like to turn over to Dan Jurman, the Executive Director for Governor Tom Wolf's Office of Advocacy and Reform for the state of Pennsylvania, to talk about the strategic vision and the work that HEAL PA is doing in the state of Pennsylvania. So Dan, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you to you and Dan and for everyone for having me here today. I am going to share my screen with you. Give me just a moment, and we'll get this up there. So first of all, let me say it's another exciting aspect for today. As I was actually born and raised in New Jersey. I lived my first 27 years there before I moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And actually, I also I see some of our HEAL PA members are on the call today, and I saw a colleague from Florida from the 4 years that I worked in Tampa on the call. So I feel blessed to be surrounded by my old home, my new home, and my in-between home on the call today. I am Dan Jurman. I'm the Executive Director of the PA Office of Advocacy and Reform. Really excited to talk to you about our trauma-informed PA plan, plan to make Pennsylvania a trauma-informed healing-centered state. So coming into my office, the first thing I had to look at was, where do I start? I had, my office is focused on better serving and protecting vulnerable populations. And as I looked at all the different places that we could dig in as a brand new office of state government, my past experience working with vulnerable populations and doing anti-poverty work especially had come to teach me that trauma is woven into most of the community ills that we struggle with and have struggled with for time immemorial. It's one of the common through lines between so many different pieces of that. And so for me, if we were really going to change state culture, and often we try to change state regulations when something goes wrong, and sometimes, you know, what went wrong was already against the regulations, it was about culture. And so if we were going to change state culture, and not just in state government, but throughout the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, then to me, becoming a trauma-informed state, which was part of the governor's declaration and his executive order that created my office, that to me was key, and it was one of the things that attracted me to the position. And you can see here the list of community challenges that I have kind of listed out as not even an exhaustive list of all the places that we find trauma as key and part of that feedback loop. Another way that we've talked about it is as a syndemic, which one of our HEAL PA members introduced me to the term. I have some background with public health and using public health strategies to fight poverty. And I was fascinated by this idea of a syndemic, where you have linked health problems. And Dave was talking about, you know, multiple epidemics. And that's kind of what a syndemic is, where you have multiple health issues that are at epidemic levels, and you find a common cause, a common thread between all of them. And in a public health, from a public health standpoint, you want to go to that core cause, that upstream issue, and see if you can disrupt it so that all of those other issues get better. I also know from my work that, you know, for the brain, chronic stress, scarcity, abuse, and danger, the brain responds in similar ways. And you know, seeing this in this particular year, you know, between COVID-19 and the murders of Black Americans, the political unrest in our country, the economic challenges, we are in such a time of chronic stress and scarcity and trauma. And I think there's also within that an opportunity for empathy and to have a broader message around this, and to reach people who might not have listened before, who had no adverse childhood experiences. And I've said to many people, I'm an 8 on the ACEs survey, and my wife of 20 years is a 0. And she has sympathized with me for 20 years, but the level of stress that she's been under as an educator this past year, for the first time in our relationship, she can empathize with what that does to your ability to function and to be your best every day. Our approach in this process, first of all, I wanted to surround myself with really smart people who'd been doing this work for a long time. I had come to the realizations that I had from working in anti-poverty work and with other vulnerable populations about just how key trauma and ACEs are to our outcomes. And but I wanted people from multiple perspectives, people from all over our Commonwealth. I mean, we have Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and then a plethora of very different communities in between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are very different from each other. And so I really wanted to get representation from all those places. So before we even started to work on our plan, we did a public call for people to join me in a think tank. And I was hoping I would get 10 people who could be part of a think tank. You know, it was going to be volunteer. They were going to have to send me their resume and do an interview. And I ended up with 68 applicants, and I kid you not, all 68 could have served on a think tank. And so I immediately had a problem of how do I say no to 43 people, because at that point I realized I have to make this larger than 10 people. So I selected 25 people to be on this think tank and asked the other 43 if they would be willing to come back into the work once we had put the plan forward to help us implement. And the vast majority of them not only said they would, but did when we were finished. We focused on virtual meetings. Before the pandemic, we were going to be virtual because I wanted that diversity of geographies and perspectives. So the pandemic did not slow us down in this work. We met from March through June, and the key areas we decided to focus on were defining the terms. Dave said this too. I said very similar things to our applicants when we were putting the think tank together, that everybody uses the phrase trauma-informed in a different way. And, you know, for one organization, they went to a training once 2 years ago and they think they're trauma-informed. Another organization is being ridiculously creative and innovative and changing all of their practice and are calling themselves the same thing. And so we wanted common language. We wanted to make sure that we understood what it meant to be trauma-informed, healing-centered, what trauma itself means in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We set mission, vision, and values for the effort. We wanted the people that were going to work together on not just planning putting this plan together, but implementing it, to know that they shared common values, that they had the same mission and vision. And so we worked on that. We wanted to build a network to connect and support all of the community-based and grassroots movements across the Commonwealth that had already been in place in some cases for decades, and to be able to connect them to each other, to share best practices and horror stories and all the ways that we learn, but also to be mentors and examples for communities that were new to this, that wanted to become trauma-informed or start an initiative or a movement, but didn't know how. We wanted to prioritize changes at the state level to affect culture, policy, and practice. And that culture piece is important. You know, governors come and go. We wanted to make sure that we had a plan to really dig into state culture so that this just became who we were as a Commonwealth. Healing from the trauma of a major disaster like COVID-19, that actually wasn't on our radar when we got started, but we switched to working from home about halfway through my interviews with think tank candidates. And we decided that that had to be a part of what was in our plan, was how do we help communities heal from major disasters, not just pandemics, but hurricanes and flooding, things like that. And then healing the damage of racism and communal and historical trauma was always on our plan, but the murder of George Floyd certainly put an exclamation mark on that work, and all of the social unrest over the summer in protest to that told us that we had to. We also knew that the radicalization of racists that's going on in the country, that also called for us to make this a very substantial part of our plan. We finished our draft work in June, and then brought in state agency representatives. The think tank members were all external to state government. We brought in state government representatives who were working on different trauma and ACEs initiatives within their own agencies, got their input, and then put the plan in front of the governor in July of last year. He approved, and then we were off to the races after that. The plan itself is focused on three main pillars. That state government pillar that I was talking about, the community-based grassroots movement piece of this. How do we, again, not try to co-opt the work of others, not get in their way, but be a real support? Big pieces of that are our focus on free training and free technical support. So it's not just organizations that have training budgets. And my whole career before moving to state government was in nonprofits. And so for a large part of my career, I didn't even know what a training budget was. So understanding that if this was really going to work for the entire Commonwealth, it couldn't be about who can afford it and who can't. And then that communal trauma piece, including the traumas from racism, discrimination, and disproportionate minority contact, especially in some of our punitive programs, and natural disasters and crises like COVID-19. How do we help people process and heal from all of these? Some of the highlights, there were 48 recommendations in the plan, which we're happy to share. But I'll just go over just some quick highlights of that for today. And so there were some things that were already happening within different state government agencies that also came up in our think tank, and we decided to lean into those just to make it clear that we thought that not only did those things make sense within their agencies, but they made sense from a healing-centered lens as well. So insurance parity, making sure that people can get coverage for behavioral health as well as physical health. Telehealth coverage and continuing that beyond the pandemic, and we've been working on that. Resource and referral tool, which is essentially an electronic medical record for people seeking social services. So getting a data tool that can follow people from county to county and that can help people connect to all the different resources for which they qualify. A living minimum wage, that was an important piece of our plan in thinking about those chronic stresses. You know, leaving people at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in scarcity means that they're never going to be able to get to that place where they self-actualize and they can't get past all of those chronic stresses that are tied up within poverty. Broadband access, especially for our rural communities, and an anti-stigma campaign around mental health. Some other things that were novel within our plan, training to change the culture, not only within state government, we are going to make trauma-informed training mandatory for all state employees. That's for the custodian to the governor. We want everyone who works for the state to understand, at least at a basic level, trauma and trauma-informed care. We're also recommending that those trainings become mandatory for police officers, judges, parole officers, social workers, and anyone who is in any public-facing helping professions. Licensure based on people. We're working on regulations around certain residential programs and facilities right now, both in our Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and in our Office of Children, Youth, and Families. And so that work is underway right now. They are using the continuum of how to go from trauma aware to healing centered that we created for organizations within our trauma informed PA plan. It is based on several plans of states that are probably sitting in this meeting. We added some things of our own, but we didn't reinvent the wheel. But we wanted to have a common measure of how you know where you are along that continuum. And now that is going into licensure starting this year. Expanding our ACEs definition. In addition to the original 10 ACEs from the CDC and Kaiser Permanente study, we looked at the other 5 ACEs that the Philadelphia ACEs study examined. Witnessing violence, feeling discrimination and bigotry, living in an unsafe neighborhood, experiencing bullying, and living in foster care or another youth congregate care setting. And we also included experiencing poverty for an extended period of time. And I understand that that one can be controversial depending on who I'm talking to, but I am happy to have that debate anytime someone wants to have it with me. Child abuse is a public health crisis. In Pennsylvania, before the pandemic, our Department of Health determined that 38% of all Pennsylvanians had experienced child abuse, either emotional or physical child abuse. So that means 8 to 10 children in any given classroom in the Commonwealth were leaving the school and going home to either physical or emotional abuse. We think that is another pandemic in that syndemic that we shared earlier, and we know that it ties back to trauma and creates new trauma in that cycle. Requiring the evolution from trauma-informed and beyond. I talked about that continuum. We're sharing that with other organizations. We're looking at it right now. It's very voluntary for a lot of organizations, but we're telling them it's coming. Even though OMSOS and OCYF have started, other state agencies are going to be moving along that line as well. Getting to the heart of racism and discrimination. We are looking at this through a trauma-informed lens. So not just the trauma that the individual experiences, but as Dave said, the trauma a community experiences. Thinking more deeply about things like, and I believe this is on my next slide as well, but things like what it means when we disproportionately take away the children of African-American families through our Office of Children, Youth, and Families, tying into hundreds of years of having people take your children away. So those historical traumas that we know are with people. And also looking at what is happening in the mind and heart of the racist, and how do we stop the radicalization of racists? How do we look at what's happening and how much it mirrors the recruitment of other radicalized groups around the world? And what can we do to interrupt that cycle? Reducing disproportionate impact on minorities, again, not just in children and youth, but also I'm part of our juvenile justice task force right now. And so trying to bring a healing centered voice to how we treat youth. And essentially currently we hurt youth in order to teach them that it's wrong to hurt someone else. That's no way to do restorative justice. And so we are looking at some bold recommendations, and I'm hoping that those will get all the way to the finish line as we finish that work over the next month. Developing trauma-informed policing. And we've got, thankfully, law enforcement representatives serving within HEAL PA. I think their voice is crucial as we talk about reform in policing, so that it's not just some social work guy like me saying this needs to change. It's also law enforcement professionals who are with us in understanding trauma and how important it is that we change the way that we're doing this work. Connecting people to each other and healers during crisis, that's a big part of what we're doing around the pandemic and natural disaster work, and I'll talk about that in a minute in terms of what we've accomplished and wins so far. So we created the plan. We then wanted to build diverse action teams larger than that initial 25-person think tank to implement this, so this wasn't just a plan that was going to sit on a shelf somewhere and gather dust. And so we started outreach to both, in this case, both state agency employees across multiple agencies, our original think tank members, the original candidates, and then others who have heard me do presentations on the plan, who were excited about it or who saw it when it was released and reached out to me. And we've just been building that team. Started out as around, I think I had around 50 people initially, and right now we're right around 150 people, I think, total, volunteering in some way with HEAL PA, which was the public-private coalition that we built to implement the work. That's HEAL PA. That logo is actually a riff on a logo that Jesse had actually built for our Pennsylvania Trauma Informed Network on PACES Network. And so we are thinking very mindfully about the fact that we don't know who's going to be the next governor of Pennsylvania. And so while the Office of Advocacy and Reform is in place right now, we wanted that public-private coalition to be something that is not dependent on the next governor understanding the importance of this work. My office is situated in the governor's office. So as the commissioner said, an office that can connect all agencies of state government. That was very important to us. If that doesn't happen within the next administration, HEAL PA can continue. Another development is our United Way of Pennsylvania has started Resilient PA as a sister organization to our coalition and a strategic partner. And their focus is outreach around trauma and ACEs and resilience. And we've got trauma experts, and they've got the United Way network of funders and businesses and partner agencies. And so they're going to be our communication channel, and we're going to be their bench of experts, and we're going to work together to make sure that HEAL PA has a partner to get those messages out, those resources that we create out to all corners of the Commonwealth. So we've got a structure that's focused on a leadership team that has, we have co-chairs on every action team. And so those co-chairs meet quarterly. And we've also added some other state agency secretaries and some other folks to those meetings, the CEO of United Way of Pennsylvania. And that leadership team is there to help connect the dots between 14 different action teams that we've put together, which I'll go over very quickly for you. The HEAL PA action teams meet monthly. They've got co-chairs. So if someone, this is all volunteers. So if someone needs to step away, it doesn't disrupt the work, and we can take our time and recruit a new partner for that remaining co-chair. We have universal teams. And so the first is community outreach and communications. That team is now working very closely with the United Way of PA. The United Way of PA's communications person actually serves on that team. And we have people who serve on the United Way of PA's steering committee for Resilient PA as well. Policy and Legislation Action Team is working with several different legislation and advocacy groups, and prioritizing what we're talking to the PA General Assembly about. What are our priorities for statutory changes? The Development Action Team is focused on fundraising and grant writing. And so we've got several folks there who've been putting together a strategy that's, again, very closely connected to that communications action team around branding. What are our needs? They've been doing survey work with all the other action teams to see how much money they each need for their low-hanging fruit projects. The Data and Evaluation Action Team, which actually has multiple university researchers represented on it, who's there to help us not only put out existing data to help strengthen our case, but is also ready and willing to do third-party evaluations. We might have to find some funding for them, but to do third-party evaluations for us as we try new pilots or initiate new programs. Our targeted teams are a training action team focused on making sure that we can start working to put together different approved trainings, using the Office of Advocacy and Reform and the staffing that we have, trying to do create some free trainings while we have the chance that we can distribute broadly. We had our first one go live with an experiment within our Department of Human Services back over the winter. Education action team, focusing on education-based recommendations within the plan. Our racial and communal trauma prevention action team, which has broken into sub-teams already focused on those different aspects of the individual trauma, the communal trauma, and advocacy around structural racism, and then focusing on disrupting and preventing the radicalization of people who are buying into racism. The criminal justice action team, focusing on all aspects of criminal justice reform and policing that are connected to trauma and healing centered work. The poverty reduction action team, recognizing how big a role poverty plays in creating additional traumas for people. Our business involvement action team, really trying to translate this to the for-profit community in our Commonwealth. We think, especially with the pandemic, I just did a presentation for Community Economic Development Council this morning on what it means to our workforce to have lived through this past year with all of these different overlays of trauma and chronic stresses, and what we need to do or be thinking about now to have a healthy workforce when this is over. Child abuse prevention action team, focusing on how we handle that very big public health crisis around child abuse. Organizational support action team, helping organizations understand how to navigate that continuum that we created to move from trauma aware all the way to healing centered. And then physical and behavioral health action team, how do we help build better connectivity between those different providers? And a big piece of this in my mind is to stop thinking of behavioral health as a separate kind of health from just our overall health. Some early wins for us, again, working on trauma-informed licensing and using that trauma-informed PA continuum within that. We had our first recorded training within DHS on the intersection of trauma and poverty. That's gone very well and that we're working to make public. Working on parity and telehealth within our insurance department. Our resource and referral tool actually is now just past procurement, and we've just signed a contract within days. Our governor has signed a $368 million broadband access work. So we've got over the next 10 years a big investment coming for broadband. Within our Department of Education, ACEs related questions are being added to our YRBS survey, and we're working right now to get our PAYS survey data from the Department of Education available to our HEAL PA team. We are taking up a universal healing strategy when it comes to ACEs. So not only are we doing surveillance, but we're also assuming, as Dave said, that every single one of our children in Pennsylvania have at least one ACE from being alive this past year. And so we want to have universal healing strategies in the hands of our educators, parents, pediatricians, everyone who comes in contact with those youth, so that we can create as many pathways toward healing as possible. We have our ACEs, I'm sorry, I need to update that, our PACES connection page with over 17 different partners that Rob Reed, one of our great partners from the Attorney General's office, has been helping us to put together. We have a dismantling systemic racism task force that our governor himself attends and leads. Our legislator has added trauma-informed training and enhanced de-escalation training into statute for all law enforcement across the Commonwealth. We are launching community conversations. As Dave said, we do trainings for social workers and professionals. We're going to do plain language community conversations with people who are struggling and vulnerable as soon as we can be back with them again after vaccinations. So we're gonna have therapists with us. We're gonna break the language about neurobiology down to plain language so people understand what chronic stress and ACEs and trauma are doing to them, and that it's okay not to be okay when all of these things are falling on your shoulders. And finally, we're actively advocating for some of that federal funding that was talked about earlier, and policy changes that we want to see based on our trauma-informed PA plan. And there's my email address and our website, and I'm happy to work together with Dave if there's any questions from folks, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Wow. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Christine, and special thanks to Angela. I started off talking about different models, and I think what you've heard today, regardless of which model you decide to follow, you have so much valuable information on how to make your state trauma informed. I think the other thing I'm picking up is that there really is no simple answer to the question of which model. It sounds like you need both state government and the non-governmental entities together to provide continuity. So I think this has just been extraordinarily valuable. I'd like to open up the floor to questions. Jesse, you said you've been tracking them?
Yeah, so I've got a list of 4 questions to start off with. So to start, for both Pennsylvania and New Jersey, have either of you used CARES Act or American Rescue Plan Act dollars to support the trauma-informed approaches in your states that you're aware of?
Go ahead, Dan.
I'll go first. Okay, so at this point, around the fringes, so I would say where we've been working on behavioral health, I'm working very closely with our Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and with our Department of Drug and Alcohol Prevention. So we've been working to try and look at where our interests overlap between the plan and their agencies and departments and steering that. The most direct ask, I just made an ask for some of our specific goals. So I just asked for funding to incentivize more handle with care programs around Pennsylvania, crisis intervention teams for police departments, as well as our toolkits that we want to build for communities to heal from racism or from the pandemic and other chronic stresses. So we want to put together a lot of tools that are free, that all Pennsylvanians can have, and we're hoping that this conversation about healing from COVID-19 includes how we heal from the stresses and traumas of COVID-19, and our governor and our cabinet have been very receptive to that conversation.
And I would say similarly in New Jersey, using CARES Act money around our shoring up our mobile response providers so that, those are organizations or agencies in all 21 counties that respond to crisis in the home. So shoring those up, many of our other mental health programs and providers converting to telehealth, supporting transition age youth and using dollars for their needs, family success centers, which are our community providers or prevention programs, but they really very quickly converted to being able to provide a different type of service remotely to families, meeting basic material needs, those kinds of things, through the purchase of technology, ensuring that clients from across our entire department, and I know many other state agencies did as well, to ensure that clients had access so that kids could be doing their remote learning, that families had access to participate in court hearings or had access to participate in telehealth or virtual meetings. So there was a lot of CARES Act money also used to support childcare subsidies, and providing dollars to childcare providers to be able to keep them open and functioning. So a lot, I think, that surrounds family health and wellness and helping to get people through the pandemic. The American Rescue Plan, we're actually researching now, and we'll be getting some presentations actually on Friday from across our department, and then that will get fed to the governor's office about how as a state, we want to propose to use the American Rescue Funds that'll be, allotted to New Jersey. So lots of planning, lots of thinking, and I think, it's been really used to shore up and support ongoing services for families.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both for that. We have a question specifically for Dave, which is, are you using the collective impact model as your guiding framework, or are you using another model?
Thank you for that question. We're using a building self-healing communities public health model. So if you are not familiar with it, it is a public health model that communities who have been successful in doing this work use. The easiest way for me to tell you about that is if you go out to the Robert Wood Johnson website, you'll find a specific article out there about the building health self-healing communities model and implementation. But basically it is a piece that talks about expanding leadership to include those who are rarely at the table, looking at results-oriented decision-making. How do we come together around things that specifically matter? Those types of things. And it is truly a community focus, because it will tell you that in this model, it's the community who has the answers to what's happening in the community, that it doesn't sit in systems.
Thank you for that, Dave. And Linda Manal was on it like a champ, and just put the resource from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, as did Duena, in the chat if you would like to see it. So thank you both for that. Dan, we have a question about, in your presentation on the Pennsylvania continuum, it looked like level 3 is labeled trauma informed and not trauma responsive, as the Missouri, like in the Missouri model, it's laid out, and level 4 is instead healing centered. So are there differences between the Missouri model and your model?
There are. We looked at, oh boy, I gotta remember. I think it was Delaware. I want to say Delaware, Wisconsin, and Missouri. And then we made our own changes within that, and tweaked here and there, and tweaked some language. And for us, we, I think Dave made that point of, we wanted to say our ultimate landing place was healing centered, was to not be talking about the trauma as the core focus, but as the strengths and resiliency of the people that we serve as our core focus. On the other end of that. And so, yeah, so some of that is, some of it is some cosmetic changes, when you have 25 or 26, if you count me, 26 people wordsmithing. Some of it was, just, personal preferences, and some of it was more substantive. But I would say that our continuum is maybe the child or cousin of all three of those.
It's a nice little family tree of models.
Right.
Appreciate it. If y'all have time for 2 or 3 more questions, I know that you're very, very busy. But do you have designated budgets? And if so, what level of funding do you receive? I know that New Jersey talked about their $4 million grant from the coalition of funders, but yeah, how does the funding work for you all?
In New Jersey, we, other than the ACE Funders Collaborative, putting up seed money and paying for at least a 2-year contract for the executive on loan, like that was really kind of the startup. And then within the Department of Children and Families, we ended up identifying another 4 or 5 positions to be able to help support Dave and build out the Office of Resilience. But there wasn't necessarily like a state budget attached to it. And even today, I mean, other than the support of philanthropy, and now the $4 million that DCF is looking to bring to the table for these micro grants, that actually is not state money, but it's federal reimbursement dollars that we've been able to free up to be able to use. And we're really hoping that those, like that initial investment in those micro grants, that we'll be able to use it almost as a challenge grant to other philanthropy within the state and around the country, and then also to other departments. And even though budgets are pretty much struck for July 1st, planning on meeting with other commissioners to say when you are not fully spent, or when your budget, you find yourself with a little bit of extra money, like we want you to put it here. So, but truly everything that we're doing and have rolled out or launched has not been with new specifically allocated dollars.
That answer makes me feel better because it's pretty similar in Pennsylvania. Every time I'm on a call with Dr. Burke Harris and I hear about the money that California invested, I'm incredibly jealous. So we originally were created as an office where all the agencies basically pay for me. So my office is me, the child advocate, which was a new position in Pennsylvania, and an executive policy specialist. And so we weren't in the budget either. And then, the governor in his budget address in the beginning of 2020 said trauma-informed care and ACEs in the budget address. And I was super excited. And then COVID devastated the state budget and it was all gone. So we're still in the same boat. Although our team's getting bigger, we've been asked, we've been doing a lot of work around racial equity in vaccinations in Pennsylvania. I've been leading the subcommittee that's working on that. I think Dave and I would hang out if I still lived in Jersey, because my response to how do we get equity, my response was it already exists at the ground level. We got to fund the grassroots organizations that already do it, that already know their communities. They already speak the same language. They already know what they need to do to get people vaccinated. We just need to give them money and get out of their way. And so we just actually got a grant for 4.8 million approved to do that, to make mini grants to grassroots organizations to partner with local vaccinators. So that was our first big win. I'm from the nonprofit sector. This is my first government job. So I'm used to having to hustle and ask everybody for the money anyway. So now we've just asked for another 4.2 million in those American Rescue dollars to help us do some of the specific initiatives that are in our plan. And I'm hopeful that we're going to get that done as well.
Yeah,
Jesse, let me go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, Daniel, I really do appreciate that. It is, I come from state government, right? I retired from the Minnesota Department of Corrections. So I understand that. And so I understand that in state government, there's always money. They may say there's no money, but there's always money. You just have to know where to go find it and find out who has it and get them to make your project their pet project. Then you can get all of that dough. All right. So you and I need to talk. We'll figure this out.
Well, and Dave, you should know, I wrote the anti-poverty plan for the city of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which at the time they had the higher poverty rate than Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. And I quoted the self-healing communities study in my anti-poverty plan. So you and I definitely have to hang out.
Oh.
If you all need any help coordinating, let me know. I would be happy.
Jesse, can I throw in a question?
Go for it,
Either
Dan.
of you tried to get your state legislature to make you a legally created state organization with a budget? So that's really it. To try and get you authorized by legislation?
You threw that right out there, didn't you? It's my dream, quite frankly, is that somehow it will be there. And part of the brilliance of what we're doing in New Jersey is that we're not a state agency, right? We're not tied to any of that.
Yep.
And so there is a plus to that. And sitting in DCF and being a part of the commissioner's executive team, I'm kind of on both. And so when the community talks to me, they talk to me as if I am in the community, that I'm right there. I'm not an agency or anything else, that I'm right there embedded in the community. And so that's the beauty of part of this. And so, yeah, I would love it. And I'm not sure what I'd do with it.
So that is a great question, Dan. And first, I'm going to ask if there are any Pennsylvania legislators in the meeting before I speak. Let me just say this is a General Assembly that has been trying to strip powers away from the governor, and so just the fact that I'm in the governor's office has probably made me more radioactive than I was before the pandemic. And I probably could have had a much better conversation about the bipartisan nature. Now, there are still legislators in Pennsylvania who are very passionate on both sides of the aisle about trauma-informed care and ACEs, and we're talking where we can. But I'm also, again, coming from 20 plus years working in the nonprofit sector. I don't necessarily think government is always the solution. I think it can help, especially when it's aligned with the community. But like Dave, I think what the community wants is key. And so I built HEAL PA as something that could completely break away from state government if it ever has to. If our next governor doesn't think that systemic racism exists, I wouldn't want him to have, or her to have, HEAL PA. I would want it to break away. And so we've kept that in mind, that this needed to be an independent coalition and that it needed to belong to the community. And I see OAR as a servant of that community, to provide the resources of state government to do what those leaders want us to do. And so the HEAL PA co-chairs, they're leading the way with how we're going to get these things done. And it's my job to give them as much support and materials as I possibly can for the time that I've got. And we also, the relationship that we formed with the United Way of Pennsylvania, we did that with an eye towards, we asked them to be our fiduciary. We're negotiating that right now so that we can write grants and do other things under the United Way of Pennsylvania umbrella as an independent coalition. We also have an eye towards, hey, if we ever get abandoned by state government, would you be willing to be the backbone in a collective impact model for us and help us keep this coalition moving forward? You know, so we were intentional in finding a statewide organization that also cared very deeply about ACEs and trauma, as we were kind of thinking, what's plan B if we don't do this? I am actively working to get an Office of the Child Advocate into statute, which to me feels a little less self-serving. It doesn't feel like I'm trying to keep a job for myself. I think that office has to be independent. I wish there was a federal statute for that, the same way there is for a long-term care ombudsman, because so many of our children are re-traumatized in residential settings, not just in Pennsylvania, but across the country.
Christine, it sounds similar to what you had mentioned in the chat. It's the same kind of dual approach.
Yeah, I mean, just basically that we're looking at how can this live outside state government? How can it exist and live beyond who the administration is? Whether that's the governor, the commissioner, that it can't live or die on, you know, who's in office right now. And so lots of ideas and thoughts about, you know, where to house this and how to create this in such a way that, you know, it can continue.
It sounds like you're developing a whole new model for government with, or 1 foot in government and 1 foot in the nonprofit world.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you know, Dave's position, that executive on loan position, it took us, what, Atia, 6 months or more to be able to like work through with the AG's office and our attorneys. How could we do this? You know, how could the position report to state government but not be funded? And once we figured that out, we now, like the First Lady's looking at hiring an executive on loan for the Nurture New Jersey and to lead that work. And we're bringing on a second executive on loan within the department. So like it, I think really is a model that I hope will, you know, continue to be developed and grow within New Jersey.
Great. Jesse, thank you.
I was just gonna say real
Please,
quickly,
Dan,
here in PA, what the result of this has been that state agencies see me as almost like a consultant to help them talk about trauma, ACEs, and vulnerable populations, and think about that work in different ways. And so I've been really pleased in how much they're using me and in a good way, and bringing me into conversations where they're trying to look for different solutions than kind of the, you know, the typical Band-Aid solutions.
And Christine, David, are the documents that found the government able to do what you're doing, are those available documents for other states?
Yeah, I think they're publicly available. I can make, you know, I'll check first, but then I can send them on to you and Jesse to be able to share.
Yeah,
That's great.
so we always follow up the CTIPP CAN calls with an email. Would love to have both of the presentations, any other resources to be able to share with the listserv. If someone isn't sure if they're on the listserv, feel free to email me at jesse@traumacampaign.org and I'll be happy to add you. I just want to be respectful of people's time. There are more questions and there always will be on such important topics, but I appreciate the past 100 minutes of incredible conversation and learning opportunities for everybody. I want to make sure that people are aware that next month we have another great CTIPP can call about how to determine if your organization is trauma informed, which will be presented by Sandy Bloom, Marsha Morgan, a number of other CTIPP board members, and some other experts in the field. And there is a free webinar tomorrow that will be through the Pennsylvania Care Partnership from that's being done by Sandy Bloom and Diane Wagenhals, which I just put in the chat again if folks want to sign up for that. Thank you so much. We will follow up soon. Don't hesitate to reach out. Dan just put his email in the chat if anybody has questions. If there were other questions that were not answered, please feel free to reach out. We would be happy to help coordinate to find answers. And again, just thank you to everyone on this call for all the great work you do. Really, really appreciate it. And have a
Thanks,
great rest of
everybody.
your day.
Yeah,
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
thank you all.